Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This week, my guest is Katherine Sheehan, and she is the Managing Director and Wealth Strategist with Crestwood Advisors LLC. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So, Katie, what made you get into law and then specifically into elder law?
That's an interesting question. So I have always wanted to be an attorney pretty much since age 8. And I thought I would go into politics. And I went to school down in DC my freshman year of college, and then ended up transferring back up to Boston. In my sophomore year of college, I ended up working for a law firm in Boston, and they did estate planning. And that is where I fell in love with estate planning. Right. And that was in 1994. And I have done nothing but that since then. So I fell in love with all things estate planning and everything that comes under that umbrella. And I have been doing that for close to 30 years.
So what is it about estate planning that gets you excited and really makes you want to do that?
It's very personal,
mm-hmm.
And it's not transactional, right? Because there are a lot of pieces of the law that are just that, right? It's transactional, and it's closing a deal, and it's very impersonal, and it's not that at all, right? So you're doing a deep dive with families and meeting them where they are and really developing relationships and really helping them, right? So that's, it's very fulfilling, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I think when people think about the legal profession, they don't think of it that way at all, right? But one of the things that I love most about this is educating folks so they have that aha moment, like, oh, this is why I need to do this, right? And also, having them feel like that weight has been lifted off their shoulders once they have got that planning done and feel like, oh, now I can breathe again. The other thing that I love about it with sort of the higher net worth planning is the puzzle pieces, right? It's like a giant puzzle, and you get to put all the puzzle pieces together. And I love all of that.
Right. What are some of the misconceptions that people have about estate planning and some of the wealth strategies that you may use?
Oh, where should I? Right. I'd say the biggest one is that folks do not need an estate plan, right? So folks will come and say, I need a will, right? And I only need a will. And most folks don't know a whole lot about estate planning and what that means and what the core components of an estate plan are, which are certainly a will, but also a revocable trust, and also ancillary documents like healthcare documents and powers of attorney, right? And so, it's helping people understand what those core components are and why they need them. And folks will say, well, I don't need a revocable trust. I don't have that level of wealth, right? Well, let's talk about what that level of wealth is. When I was practicing law, I would say everyone needs, and I still say it now, right? Everyone needs estate planning, whether you have $2 or $200 million, right? Let's just talk about what you need and why you need it. And I firmly believe everyone needs a revocable trust, whether you have $2 to $200 million, right? There's so many wonderful things that revocable trusts do, and you need them for varying reasons, depending on your level of wealth, and we just need to talk about it. So it's not, I don't have this level of wealth, so I don't need this planning. You do need the planning. Let's just talk about why you need it, and we'll walk you through it. And then, of course, as their levels of wealth grow, there's more planning that needs to be done. There's different types of trusts that needs to be done. And that's where those fun acronyms come into play,
Right.
right? But those are the biggest misconceptions is I don't need this kind of planning, or that doesn't apply to me, right? Or, as you and I were talking about before we got recording is the miseducation of things. And that is, I think that's what keeps me up at night as a planner is, the folks that come in and say, I heard this on the radio, and that is what,
Right.
gives me agita, right? So it's, let's talk through the right information, and let's talk through why you need it or why you might not need it, right? So that's again why I do this, because I want to give people the right information.
Now, a lot of people think that it's going to be very expensive to do, estate planning. So because of that, they really don't reach out to anybody. They don't get the education behind why they need certain things. Um, when people say that to you, how do you help them understand things better?
Right. So it's not necessarily super expensive, right? So the cost of things is certainly going to depend on what you're getting, right? And where you are geographically located, right?
Right.
So I am in Boston, and so firms in Boston are going to charge probably more than firms in the burbs, or firms that are located in the Midwest, right?
Right.
But pricing should not also, should not be a reason why folks are not doing this planning. And I used to get that question a lot, like, why can't I just go on LegalZoom and print this out? Or why can't I just handwrite this will myself? And my response would be, the plan is not going to be worth the paper that it is printed on, right? If you want to have this done and done correctly, you need to go to the professional. I have a mug that says, do not confuse your Google search with my law degree,
Right.
right? And so, you can do things and cut corners now, but I can guarantee you that it will end up costing your family time and money on the other end, right?
Sure.
To get it done the right way, it might cost you a couple $1,000s more to do it the right way now, but I can guarantee you it will cost you thousands more on the other end if you don't get it done the right way now. And when I'm working with our clients at our firm, I am always fee sensitive, right? So I will match them up with an attorney that I think will best suit their needs, and that is going to be cost effective for them. So if I know that client wants an attorney that's going to charge a flat fee, I'm going to match them up with an attorney that's going to charge a flat fee. If it's going to be someone that's going to charge an hourly rate, it's going to be one that's going to be doing it in the most cost effective manner possibly, right? And when I'm doing, and I'm sitting on the other side of the table now, so I'm not the one drafting the plans anymore. I'm
Right.
the sending them off to the attorney. And so I'm totally objective in this, right? So I can pass the clients off to who I think is best suited for the job and who's going to get it done in the most cost effective manner possible for the client. So I'm giving them nice, objective information
Right.
about what's best for them.
Now, you talked about that you think that everybody should have an irrevocable trust. Without going into, big details, can you tell us why and what some of those benefits are by having an irrevocable trust?
Yep. And this is an area where there are a lot of practitioners that differ on this, because there will be some that will say, no, you don't need a rev trust. And that tends to be in states where probate is not that big of a deal, although I don't know any real state where
Right.
probate is truly not that big of a deal. And again, I'm in Massachusetts, where of course it is a big deal. But so probate avoidance, right, is a big key factor for revocable trusts. But if you have minor children, right, having a revocable trust will allow you to have provisions within that revocable trust for the care and keeping of those children and the assets for their benefit until they reach a certain age, or, for the lifetime of those children.
Right.
For the dispositive provisions, right? You can put whatever you want in there for your children or for the beneficiaries. And now, I have this conversation with clients a lot. Life is uncertain. We want to protect our beneficiaries from themselves, from their creditors, from their potential spouses in the event of
Ex-spouses.
divorce, right? We've had a lot of cases recently where trusts that they are the beneficiaries of have been pierced in divorce cases. And so a lot of the clients that I have been talking to are leaving lifetime trusts for the benefit of their children rather than having trusts go outright to their kids, right? So having the flexibility to craft those provisions for their kids is, that's a big deal. You can also put in a level of estate planning for your own kids within that. So you can do all this kind of planning within a revocable trust, right? So you can do planning for yourself while you're living. And I also, I like to get people excited about planning. So it's not just death planning, it's life planning. And so revocable trust is for you while you are living, and then it continues on after you pass away. So it's one place where you can administer all of your assets. It's like a bucket, right? Put all your assets in that bucket while you are living. You can administer those assets while you're living. It's ease and administration of those assets while you're alive. If you're incapacitated, your successor trustee has ease and administration of those assets. And then once you pass away, ease and administration of those assets and all of those wonderful dispositive provisions that you've crafted for your beneficiaries will continue on. Creditor protection, estate planning benefits, all of those good things. And then, of course, if you are in a state that has an estate tax, which of course I am in,
Right.
And then, of course, if they have a federal estate tax problem, revocable trusts allow us to have the clients utilize their state and estate tax exemptions, right? So Rev trusts allow us to do a lot of magical things, and that's why I encourage clients to utilize them.
So just to be clear, because I think sometimes people don't understand that there are different types of trust. There's irrevocable and there's revocable.
Correct.
And what you're talking about is the revocable, where someone, I would still have 100% control over all 100%. Of my stuff.
Yeah. And that's a key differentiator, right? So, and I always say that because people hear the word trust and they think it's a scary word, right? And so I always make it very clear that a revocable trust, you have 100% control over that, 100% access. It is not a separate taxable entity. It operates under your Social Security number. And typically the grantor of that is going to also be the trustee, right? So they're not relinquishing any control or access over those assets.
Right. Now, if somebody has a revocable trust, that still does not take place of a power of attorney or medical power of attorney. So can you go into that a little bit?
Yep. So I had mentioned sort of the core components of an estate plan, right? So when I talk about core plan, that's going to be a will, a revocable trust, a power of attorney, and then healthcare documents. And typically the healthcare documents are going to be a healthcare proxy, a HIPAA authorization, and a living will. And depending on what state you're in, those documents are going to be called different things, but fundamentally they do the same thing, right? So a power of attorney is basically where someone steps into your shoes and can do whatever you can do, right? So that yields an awful lot of authority to that attorney, in fact. But it's very important to have that document in place, because without that document, the only way that someone can have authority to do those things on your behalf would be to go to the probate court and be appointed conservator on your behalf, which nobody wants to do, right? But you do want to make sure that the person that you're naming as attorney, in fact, of course, you trust them and that they have a command over, whatever needs to be done. And sometimes it's very mundane tasks, like you need to call, Verizon and shut off the phone bill, right? Or it could be signing a contract, or sometimes when I am working with business owners, I encourage them to have a separate power of attorney that they're executing just for the business, things like that. A lot of times, if they, they have a trust, the attorney in fact and the trustee might be the same person, right? Because there's sometimes a lot of overlap sort of in
Right.
some of the duties that they're carrying out, but they're separate. The attorney in fact doesn't have any authority over trust assets, and the trustee doesn't have any authority over things that are outside of the trust. So that's a good
Right.
point to make. Healthcare documents, healthcare proxy, that's where you're naming a healthcare agent to make decisions on your behalf only when you cannot make them yourself. So that's only invoked when a physician says, you, Jack Smith, cannot make a decision on your behalf, and your wife, your whoever is going to make that for you. Blanket authority to make choices on your behalf. So you need to make sure that your healthcare agent knows precisely what those things are.
Right.
That's where the living will comes into place. In some states, a living will is not operative, like Massachusetts, where I am. Other states it is. But the purpose of a living will is to communicate what those wishes are, right? I want the plug pulled. I don't want the plug pulled. And then everything in between. A HIPAA authorization is where you're listing out the people that you would want to have access to your information. So the example I typically give is if you were in the hospital, who would you want to be able to call and receive information about your condition, right? It's the one document I always say, I don't mind if you put 10 people on there because you're not giving them authority
Right.
to do anything on your behalf. You're
Right.
just allowing them access to information. But those healthcare documents in the power of attorney are super important because without them, someone has to go to probate court to get guardianship and conservatorship to do things on your behalf, right? So super, super important. And if we have folks that are snowbirds, right? Maybe they're up in the Northeast in the summertime and down south in the wintertime, they may need two sets of those documents, right? They may need a set up here in the Northeast, and they may need a set down south because all estate planning documents are state specific,
Right.
but those may not be honored whatever state that you're in, and you want to make sure that whoever needs to use that on your behalf is going to be able to do it.
Right. Now, to take this a little bit further, so those documents that we just talked about, when someone passes, are those still good? Or, I mean, obviously the healthcare ones aren't because you're deceased, but what about the power of attorney?
That is not. So that document ceases to have any authority when the person passes away. And that is another big misconception, right? So
Yep.
attorney in fact will think, oh, I can do this. I was on the bank account as an attorney in fact. Nope. You have no authority once the principal passes away, right? So you might have authority as a trustee when the person passes away. And if you're the personal representative or the executor under a will, you might have authority. But if you were the attorney in fact, you have zero authority once that person passes away.
I think that that's something that's really important because I have many times kids come to us, hey, know you did our parents' taxes, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm asking them, it's like, okay, do you have your letter of administration? Do what document do you have that authorizes me to talk to you? And lots of times, oh, here's the power of attorney. And I try to explain to them, okay, that's not any good anymore.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that.
Yeah.
If someone has ask this a different way. So many times, if people are going into, say, a nursing home or something like that, and they don't have a trust, or if they have a revocable trust, what protection does I give them or not give them if this happens?
Sure. So that sort of opens up a whole other window
Right.
of planning, right? So when we think about what I would call long-term care planning, right, we start to think about asset protection and Medicaid planning and qualification for benefits. And we also want to make sure that we also have our basic documents in place or our core documents in place, right? So we want to make sure that we have we want to make sure we have our powers of attorney and our healthcare documents and our rev trust and our will in place. Well, we may also want to have what I would call a Medicaid trust in place, if it is appropriate, right? So there may be clients that find themselves in a suitable asset position where they may qualify for Medicaid benefits, or they may in a near term qualify for benefits. And so we may want to position them to better qualify for benefits by putting in place a Medicaid trust or maybe a life estate deed, something like that, right? And the thinking there is, I don't have a ton of money, but what I have, I've worked really hard for. I may have a few $100,000. I have a piece of real estate with a bunch of equity in it. And what I do have, I would like to pass to my kids, and I don't want to spend it all on a nursing facility. So I would like to protect it. Maybe I can transfer that into an irrevocable Medicaid trust. And if I can get past the look back window, which is 5 years, right? Then after that point, theoretically, that asset is protected. I say theoretically because in a lot of states, not all, because some states are far more transfer planning friendly than others. But again, in Massachusetts, these trusts are routinely challenged, although on appeal, we tend to have some favorable wins. But they can be challenged, even if it's a totally well-crafted trust and you've done all the things that you were supposed to do. But theoretically, you transfer the property into a trust. It's a well-crafted trust. The trustee did everything they were supposed to do. The grantor didn't retain any benefit other than what they were supposed to. Get over the 5-year window, assets protected, right? In light of the fact that some of these trusts have been challenged, we've also seen things like life estate deeds come back into favor. I did a lot of Medicaid planning a number of years ago when I was practicing, and these were pretty popular then, like, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, something like that. And they're pretty simple too, which is why people like them. So they're pretty easy to put into place. And basically it's transferring your real estate into a deed that says, I, as the grantor, retain a life interest in this real estate, but then when I die, by operation of law, this property transfers to my kids or whoever is on this deed, right? But the date of transfer I made a transfer, right? So that starts that 5-year clock ticking as well. Now, just with any other planning tool, there's caveats there too, right? So you have remaindermen on there that are technically owners. So, if one of the kids gets a divorce or files for bankruptcy, there's a potential issue there. Or if the property is sold, the proceeds are going to go to the remainder men, who are your kids, not you, right? But those are some options. And then the thinking there is that you're positioning yourself for qualification for benefits at some point in the future.
But I guess the good thing with all of this, though, is there's flexibility there that if I want to make a change for whatever reason, or I want to sell something or whatever, I can still do that, and we're not having to go through and totally redo the trust again.
Yes. The key with that is it's the transfers, right? So you can, if you put anything in a trust, whether it's a piece of real estate or securities or cash, right? The trustee can do whatever they want with those assets. The key is that the grantor cannot retain any benefit from those assets other than a very limited income stream from those assets.
Right.
So if the grantor is retaining anything other than that, then we have a problem. But other than that, the trustee can buy and sell and do whatever they want. So as long as the trust is being administered properly, you're okay.
Right.
That's
I guess and again, you were saying about that the assets are being transferred into these trusts, and I think that's another question, because many times, and it doesn't happen as much as it used to years ago, is people would set trusts up, but then they would never change the title of anything into their trust. So literally that trust wasn't worth the paper written on.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that a little bit?
sure. And that's an issue for not only for Medicaid planning, but just planning in general, right?
Right.
So I always say just for regular planning, right? If you have a revocable trust, right, it's not going to do all those magical things I was talking about before unless it is funded,
Right.
right? And so by funding, I mean just retitling assets in the name of that trust. You got to fund your trust, or it's not going to do all those wonderful things. For Medicaid planning, if you don't transfer those assets into that trust, you never start that 5-year clock ticking, right? So if you get to that point where, we're starting to think we can apply for benefits and we think we've gotten to that 5-year clock, and you look back and you're like, oh my goodness, this property was never transferred into this trust. The whole entire plan has just been blown up, right? Um, that's
Yeah.
potentially practice on the attorney's part, but
Right.
that happens
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah.
And so you gotta dot your I's and you gotta cross your T's, and trust funding is a huge issue. And the transfer of property that's an oops on the attorney's part, but transfer of assets is not an oops on the attorney's part. That's an oops on the client's part, right? So if you're supposed to be transferring assets and retitling assets into the trust and you never did it, that's on you.
Right, right. I mean, that's where you need to work along with your professional that you have that's helping you. It's like, like you said, you can always, lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I mean, it's like,
100%.
you guys are getting us to the goal line. We need to step across it by transferring those assets, retitling things, and so forth. And lots of times I'll see when we're going through helping them with the tax returns and stuff, there's always this stray account out there that nobody knows about, type thing. So,
And I think it's a team, I would say it's a team sport, right?
yeah,
Planning is very interdisciplinary and nothing should be done in a vacuum, right? So it's so important that every member of the planning team is sitting around the table for the client, because, you as the CPA might see something that the attorneys doesn't see, or the financial planner. So we all have to be seeing these, have eyes on things and keeping the same messaging, and eventually the client's going to do what we say, we
right.
hope. Right? So funding very much, I think if we all talk about funding to the client, eventually they're going to fund those trusts.
Yeah. And that's something that from my side of things, as we sit down every year and do a return for somebody, when we get those tax documents, lots of times they're titled in the living trust of, or whatever, however it's titled. But then we'll have that stray one that'll be just their name, and we will say, hey, I see everything else is in this trust. This isn't. You may want to, make sure that it's they're titled properly for future. Katie, we covered a lot of stuff, and this has been really good. And I'm gonna have to have you back on because, like, talking about special needs trust and other things that are more generational and helping. So we'll have to have you back on to talk about that. But what have I not asked you? You wish I had. And I know there's a lot of stuff that we haven't even scratched the surface of, but
I think nothing really that you haven't covered. I think just the most important thing is to pull the trigger for folks. People get so paralytic just in the planning
yeah,
process, and then they do nothing, and people do not understand the consequences of doing nothing. And it's a mess, right? One of the primary reasons we do planning is so we can have control over what happens when we are not here anymore, and so we
right,
can leave as nice of a tidy package as we possibly can for our loved ones. And when you don't do any planning, you have no control and you leave a giant mess for your loved ones. And
right.
the person that's going to determine what happens and who gets what will be a probate court judge. Nobody wants that,
Yeah.
right? So I can't stress enough, just do it. And I also, clients come to us all the time and they say, I wish I had done this sooner. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're doing it now.
Right, right. So, Katie, if people like what they hear, they want to reach out to you, they want to learn more, how can they reach you?
So they can reach out to me at Crestwood Advisors, K Sheehan at crestwoodadvisors.com.
Great. Katie, really appreciate your time today. It's been a great talk. I've learned a lot today.
Awesome. It was a pleasure to be on with you.
Great. Hey, this week my guest was Katherine Sheehan, and she's the Managing Director and Wealth Strategist with Crestwood Advisors. I'll see you guys next week.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.